All right, so you finally decided to be milling your grains, and now you're buying wheat berries and all of those wonderful grains and beans. But now the big question is how to store it. And then you go online and you're like, oh my word, I need to buy all of these other things in order to store grains properly. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not exactly true. Storing grains is not as complicated as you think. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia and I teach you all about real whole grains, all from a biblical perspective. So I teach you how and why to be milling your own grains and more. Okay, so I gotta hit this video again about storing grains. I do this every now and then periodically because I get more updated info, whatever the case may be. But it's very important that we hit on this topic because storing grains isn't as complicated as you think, and it can be a little discouraging whenever you finally bit the bullet and you bought a grain mill and now you're buying grains only to be told that you need even more things that you have to purchase to store grains properly. And y'all, it ain't that complicated. As a little bit of a background, I have been milling my own grains for over a decade now and storing grains for just as long. I am here in Florida where it is very hot and very humid, and we've got all the bugs and we have all the pests, and you know, it's like center of the sun hot here in the summertime, so definitely more extreme weather conditions. And I have been storing my grains for this entire time in various conditions. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with y'all how to store grains, how I personally store my own grains. The second thing is there are 2 to 3 exceptions to the general overall rules of storing grains that I'll be sharing with y'all. And finally, I'm going to end with just lessons that I have learned personally throughout all of these years milling and storing grains, so y'all don't make the same mistakes or have little surprises like I've had. All right, so first off, just simply, how should you be storing grains? And do know that I understand that farmers, companies you purchase grain from, give you directions about how to store grains, but allow me to uncomplicate things. First and foremost, you have 2 enemies when it comes to your grains. The 2 main enemies are any sort of moisture and any kind of pest. And pests are not just bugs. They include mice, rodents, you know, whatever the case may be, but any sort of pest and any sort of moisture are the 2 biggest enemies when it comes to your grains. And so in essence, what you need to do to store grains is you just need to make sure that they're in a good container with a good lid that's going to keep out said moisture and said pest. So what this means for y'all is you do not necessarily need your Mylar bags, your oxygen absorbers. You don't necessarily need those things. Again, there are a few exceptions. Stay tuned for that. But because honestly, you really just need like a really good bucket, really good lid, or like a mason jar, a glass container, good lid, just something to keep out those bugs and moisture. And if it's keeping those out, then most likely your grains are going to last for a very, very, very long time. I want to remind y'all that human beings have been storing grains, dried grains successfully for thousands of years before our modern air conditioning, modern refrigeration, the invention of Mylar bags, or oxygen absorbers. I've mentioned this before that in the story of Joseph back in the Bible, the Old Testament, is the point of all that was there were 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So during those 7 years over in Egypt in ancient times, they were storing up all the grains that they had in the years of plenty to have them in the 7 years of famine. So that's quite a long time to be storing grains. And again, that's before refrigeration, oxygen absorbers, all of those things. And they were able to feed the world successfully just fine. Now, me personally, what my personal grain storage system is I do generally keep grains in buckets with good lids. And I actually keep them out in my uninsulated shed. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm here in Florida and we have very hot summers where it's like a feel of over 100 degrees, very high humidity. So I do need to be concerned about moisture. And then of course, bugs. We're like the land of bugs. I'm in the country as well, and oh my word, and in the woods. So I'm country, I'm rural, I'm in the woods. We've got all the bugs, and we have mice and rats and snakes and, you know, all of those type of things. And so long as I'm keeping them in good buckets with good lids, it is keeping out all of those things. In fact, I have really tested this because way back whenever we first started our home milling journey, my husband actually built me a little like outdoor kitchen, and my buckets of grains were outside, and they were only under one of those like 10 by 10 awnings that you see like at farmers markets, and they were underneath kind of a shelf that he built me. But whenever it rained really hard, water would actually splash onto the buckets, and they were just fine. Like, I even had water on the buckets, but because I had really good lids, which I do recommend the Gamma lids for easy on and off, those are really, really great. But so long as I had good lids and good buckets, they did just fine. I never had my grains go bad. Now, I also keep them in glass jars, mason jars, even plastic containers that I have here in my house. So I'm not constantly having to go out to my shed in my with my bucket. So I actually have a dual system, and I'm here to tell you that you can keep them in an uninsulated shed or garage or whatever it is you have outside just fine. Again, just keep in mind that you have good containers and good lids. Don't keep them in bags. If you buy the grains in bags, do very quickly get them to a good container, because you just never know if like water splashes onto a bag, or pests can get inside bags a lot easier than they can in good containers. And as far as container goes, you're just looking for food grade safe containers. Personally, I've even used like buckets I've gotten from Lowe's or Home Depot, which are not food grade. So with those, I typically will just keep the bag, like, so if I buy the grains like from Azure Standard, they come in a bag, I would just put the bag in the bucket, just to be on the safe side to keep out any chemicals. But otherwise, if you're using food grade safe buckets, then you're just fine, just dumping the grains in there. Now, you can use Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. In fact, depending on who you buy from, they may already come in, the grains may come in buckets with Mylar bags inside of them and oxygen absorbers and the bucket sealed on top of that, which, if that comes to you, you're good. You don't need to do anything until you open it. But you don't necessarily need the Mylar bags or oxygen absorbers. If anything, I do recommend oxygen absorbers if you really are concerned about like the teeny little bugs that might hatch from grains, because the point of the oxygen absorbers is that if there's no oxygen, the bugs cannot hatch, bugs cannot survive. So if you are just really uncomfortable with it, y'all just throw in some oxygen absorbers, and I'll link some down for y'all below in the description box. But just throw some oxygen absorbers in and you're gonna be just fine. Okay, so that is the basic of just storing grains, just the bare basics. However, I have found that there are a few exceptions to these rules. And these 3 exceptions concern rice, corn, and oat groats. So what I mean by oat groats is before they are rolled, and they're the oat groats. Basically, they look like wheat berries, but they are oats. And there are some slight exceptions to this. I found that with rice and with corn, and by rice I mean brown rice. Brown rice and corn, they are a bit starchier of grains. The structure of them is just different. So I do find you do need to take a few extra steps with these. Now, there's 2 things that you can do. One, you can just throw them into the freezer. So when you get the grains into your house, just throw them into your freezer for say 24 to 48 hours. And then you can just take them straight from the freezer and dump them into your bucket with a good lid, or whatever container you have with a good lid. And what that does is that's killing off any sort of bugs and those little black pests that may hatch in those. And I know it sounds gross and disgusting, the fact that you have bugs, but they're something from nature, y'all, and it happens. The point is you don't want them to hatch. They're just little mites that can be in the grains, no matter how clean the grains are. They just may be there, and you don't want them to hatch. And I find that it's a bit more problematic with brown rice and with corn especially. So you can just throw those in the freezer, or just put oxygen absorbers into the containers that you're storing them in. It does the same thing, which is a lot easier to do that with 50 pounds of corn than it is to throw that into the freezer. So you can do either one. I've only had corn go bad once on me, and that is whenever I never did either one of these steps. And so I learned the hard way. And so that's why I say these are a little bit different. I also say that brown rice is not good for extremely long-term storage. Like wheat berries, you can go a long time. They can generally be stored for a very, very long time. Brown rice, not so much, because it is a bit oilier of a grain. So I wouldn't recommend really storing brown rice for more than a year. As far as oat groats go, is you want to be able to purchase them whenever they state that they have been stabilized or that they have been toasted oat groats. So when you go to places, it's going to say stabilized oat groats or toasted oat groats. That doesn't mean that they have cooked them. It just means that they have slightly kind of dried them out or slightly heated them up. And what that does is it just stabilizes the oil that is in oat groats so that you can store them longer. All right, so those are the few exceptions. Before we get to the lessons that I have learned, I do want to share with y'all the sponsor of this video, which is Grand Teton Ancient Grains. And they are totally relevant when it comes to purchasing grains because some of their grains that I've received, they come in sealed buckets in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. I'm telling you, these buckets I could probably bury and they'd be fine 30 years from now. Like they really go over the top. If you're purchasing the grains in the buckets, that's how they are. You can also purchase them in bags, so make sure you transfer them to a good container. But Grand Teton Ancient Grains is my go-to place for my ancient grains right now. So Corazon, einkorn, all of those wonderful popular ancient grains, you need to get them from Grand Teton Ancient Grains because they are organic farmers. They are the reasons that we have grains like einkorn here in the United States. They are regenerative farmers, which means that they are really taking good care of their soil. The better the soil, the more nutrient dense your grains are, which is perfect, especially if you're storing your grains. And they actually are a mill as well. So if you're wanting to try out some of maybe the flour before you get your grain mill, because you should be milling your grains, then you can do that through Grand Teton. So be sure to just check them out at grainsandgrit.com/Teton. Use this coupon code up here on the screen for 10% off your first order. And thank you so much to Grand Teton Ancient Grains for sponsoring this video and for giving us some excellent clean grains that we can store very easily. Now let me tell y'all some lessons that I have learned. Okay, because I'm hoping that y'all don't make the same mistakes or have the same surprises that I have in the past. Lesson number one that I've learned is the biggest thing that you need to do is you need to be rotating your grains. Frankly, you need to be consuming whole grains on a regular basis. Don't be buying grains to be like, I'm going to keep them for when stuff hits the fan, who knows from now, which it's not bad to store grains for that reason. But if you don't actually know how to use them, and if you're not using them now, the time to learn is not when, we're peering at Armageddon. Okay, or when, we have had an EMP hit our country and you're now having to figure out how to not only mill grains and bake them, but also like cook them over a fire. That's not the time to learn. Okay, you need to be using these grains now on a regular basis. So that allows you to be rotating your grains. So you may have a stockpile of over a year, but you're going to be just rotating those grains out. And the beauty of that and the wisdom of this also is that if the grains go bad, you're not going to find out whenever stuff hits the fan, and you're relying on that. With you rotating through the grains, you're going to find that out a lot sooner rather than later. Second thing that I've learned is about beans, concerning beans. Dried beans store same type of ways as you do with your typical wheat berries and things like that. Now, the reason people state to store beans in Mylar bags is it does tend to keep the like the color better, maybe the freshness of the beans better. Because one thing that I've learned is that old beans take forever to cook, if at all. I have a bucket of navy beans that I don't even know how old it is because it was given to me. And y'all, those beans just will never cook. I'm thinking of just throwing them away. I don't know, because I've literally cooked them for like 16 hours in a slow cooker, which even beans that I have not soaked cook in 6 to 8 hours in a slow cooker. Like the fact that I could never get those beans soft enough, they always were still like a raw peanut texture. It was insane. And I've done this before with these batch of beans, and they just take forever to cook. And if I'm storing these and it's the end of the world, I'll make do, but that also means I'm going to need a lot of like wood on the fire to cook these beans. So just know that really old beans take a long time to cook. So if you have old beans, I think if you were to really soak them for 12 even to 24 hours before cooking them, that's going to help. But just keep that in mind when you're storing beans, is the older the beans are, the longer they take to cook. The third massive lesson that I have learned is to be checking your containers, especially if you have moved them significantly at any point in time. So for example, I learned this lesson the hard way because one of the moves that we made from house to house, we actually did have some movers to help us. And so they were getting all of these buckets, which I have like a lot of buckets of grains, so probably more than the average person, but still. They're moving a ton of my grain buckets. And unfortunately, one of them that had a gamma lid on it, it got cracked in the rim of the gamma lid. And I didn't know about it because I didn't check all my buckets after we had moved. And I didn't know about it until maybe about 2 to 3 months later. And I go to open that bucket and unfortunately moisture had gotten into it. And let's just say it was not a pretty sight. With my grains. They were moist, meaning they had sprouted a little bit, bugs had gotten into it. Frankly, my chickens were happy. Okay, my chickens, I saved some money on animal feed because my chickens got those grains. Yeah, so anytime you move the buckets, be very careful when you move them and you may want to inspect them. Again, this is why I say to be rotating through your grains because that way you catch these things. And frankly, that's how I caught it, is I was rotating through my grains and I got to that bucket and that's when I realized the mistake had been made. Okay, so that's it, y'all. Just wanted to let y'all know, again, it's not complicated. You can use Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. There's nothing wrong being on the safe side when it comes to storing your grains. But I think the key takeaways is just making sure you're keeping out moisture and all the pests and that you rotate through your grains. So therefore you're gonna catch anything that is faulty and you're gonna be just fine. If you have any tips for storing grains or let us know how you actually store grains yourself, be sure to comment below. As always, I hope that y'all have an excellent and wonderful day and I'll see you next week. Bye.